The first thing you learn about war is that nobody really knows what they're doing. I learned this while crouched behind an overturned hovercar in downtown Phoenix, watching purple energy beams slice through the air above my head like deadly party streamers. The Kethver had been studying us for a millennium, apparently. Watching, learning, cataloging every aspect of human behavior, military doctrine, and technological capability. Fat lot of good it did them. My name is Sarah Rodriguez, and I'm a maintenance technician for the Phoenix Transit Authority. 3 hours ago, I was fixing a broken maglev coupling on line 7. Now I'm apparently part of Earth's last desperate defense against an alien invasion that caught every government, military, and intelligence agency with their pants down. The irony isn't lost on me. The Kethver ships had appeared without warning, massive crystalline structures that hung in the sky like frozen lightning. Within minutes, they disabled our satellites, grounded our aircraft, and knocked out most of our communications. Their ground forces descended in perfect formation, tall, elegant beings in flowing robes that seemed to be made of liquid starlight. Each one moved with the precision of a Swiss watch, their actions coordinated to the microsecond. They'd studied us. They knew exactly how we'd respond to invasion. They'd prepared for our military tactics, our chain of command, our standard operating procedures. They'd even prepared for our improvisational capabilities. Or, so they thought. What they hadn't prepared for was someone like me. I peeked around the edge of the hovercar and saw 3 Kethver soldiers advancing down Central Avenue in perfect triangular formation. Their weapons elegant crystalline staffs that hummed with barely contained energy were held at precisely the same angle. Their steps were perfectly synchronized. Everything about them screamed, "We know exactly what we're doing." That's when I spotted the construction site. Phoenix had been in the middle of a massive infrastructure overhaul. The new transit lines required deep excavation, and the city was full of half-finished projects. One of them was right across the street from my position. A partially completed underground section with exposed utility conduits, temporary power cables, and most importantly, a jury-rigged connection to the main power grid. I'd worked on that site last month. I knew every pipe, every cable, every safety violation that the contractors had tried to hide from the inspectors. The Kethver might have studied us for 1,000 years, but they'd never met a union maintenance worker with a grudge against shoddy construction. The thing about being a maintenance tech is that you spend most of your time fixing other people's mistakes. You learn to look at any system and immediately spot the weaknesses, the shortcuts, the points where everything could go catastrophically wrong if you just applied pressure in the right way, or, in this case, the wrong way. I had my tool belt with me, standard issue for a transit worker: multi-scanner, plasma cutter, emergency override codes for city systems, and a collection of adapters that could connect pretty much anything to anything else. Most people would look at it and see junk. I saw possibilities. The Kethvar were now 20 meters away, moving with that same infuriating precision. Their leader, distinguished by additional crystalline ornaments on his robes, paused to scan the area with some kind of device, probably looking for human life signs. According to the brief, panicked radio transmissions I'd heard before communications went down, they were systematically eliminating all resistance. I pulled out my multi-scanner and started hacking into the construction site's temporary power grid. The passwords were laughably simple. Contractors always used the same ones. Within seconds, I had access to the entire electrical system for the block. The Kethvar had studied our military. They'd prepared for our tanks, our aircraft, our infantry tactics. They'd even prepared for guerrilla warfare and insurgency operations, but they hadn't prepared for someone to weaponize a municipal power grid. The underground section had a massive temporary transformer, one of those industrial units that could power a small city block. It was connected to the main grid through a series of hastily installed cables that were already operating at about 90% of their rated capacity. The safety systems were a joke, and the whole thing was surrounded by water pipes, gas lines, and fiber optic cables in a configuration that would make any safety inspector weep. I started rerouting power through the system, overriding safety protocols and pushing voltage far beyond recommended limits. The HFY were 10 meters away now, their scanning devices focused on the building to my left. They moved like they were following a script which, given their apparent obsession with studying us, they probably were. That was their first mistake. Triggered the overload just as they stepped over the manhole cover that connected to the underground section. The explosion wasn't large just enough to crack the street surface and send a geyser of sparks and steam shooting up through the gaps in the pavement, but it was enough to break their formation. As they reflexively moved to avoid the debris, for the first time since the invasion began, I saw a HFY look confused. Their leader turned toward my position, his elegant features twisted in what might have been puzzlement. His scanning device was sweeping frantically, trying to understand what had just happened. The other two had broken formation entirely, their perfect synchronization disrupted by the unexpected obstacle. That's when I hit them with Phase 2. The construction site had been installing new smart traffic systems along with the transit lines. The whole area was networked, with sensors and controllers connected to the city's central management system. Most of it was still in testing mode, which meant I had administrative access to everything. I triggered every piece of equipment simultaneously. Construction lights blazed to life, strobing in patterns that would have given an epileptic seizure to anyone within 100 meters. Emergency sirens wailed from a dozen different directions. Automated barriers started rising and falling in random sequences. The holographic safety warnings began cycling through their entire database of messages. In 17 different languages, the HFY soldiers stumbled backward, their scanning devices overwhelmed by the sensory chaos. Their leader was shouting orders in their musical language, but his subordinates were clearly struggling to process what was happening. They'd studied us for 1,000 years. They knew about our weapons, our tactics, our standard responses to crisis situations, but they'd never seen anyone turn a construction site into a weapon. I wasn't done yet. The beautiful thing about urban infrastructure is that it's all connected. Water systems, power grids, traffic management, emergency services, everything links together in ways that most people never think about. When you spend your career keeping these systems running, you start to see the city as a single, massive machine. A machine that I was about to break in very creative ways. The HFY had regrouped, but they were clearly rattled. Their perfect formations had dissolved into a more cautious, adaptive approach. They were starting to treat this as an unknown situation rather than a scripted response. That was progress, but it also meant they were getting smarter. Time to get dumber. I accessed the central traffic management system and started creating chaos. Every traffic light in a 6-block radius began cycling through random patterns. The automated delivery drones that serviced the business district started launching themselves from their charging stations and flying in erratic patterns. Emergency vehicles throughout the city began receiving false dispatch calls, their sirens adding to the cacophony. But the real masterpiece was the water system. Phoenix had an extensive network of decorative fountains and water features throughout the downtown area. They were all connected to a centralized control system that I'd worked on during the summer. The pumps were industrial grade, designed to create impressive displays for tourists and city events. I reprogrammed every fountain within a 2-mile radius to activate simultaneously at maximum pressure. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Geysers of water erupted from every plaza, sidewalk, and decorative pool in the area. The streets began flooding as the drainage systems, already overwhelmed by the volume, backed up and overflowed. The HFY soldiers found themselves wading through knee-deep water that was shooting up from storm drains and decorative features in completely unpredictable patterns. Their elegant robes, apparently not designed for practical situations, became waterlogged and heavy. Their crystalline weapons sparked and flickered as they were doused repeatedly. Most importantly, their coordinated movements became impossible as they struggled to maintain footing on the suddenly treacherous terrain. I watched from my position behind the hover car as the 3 soldiers tried to adapt to the new conditions. They were clearly intelligent. Their movements became more cautious, their formation more flexible, but they were still thinking like soldiers, trying to apply tactical solutions to what was essentially a municipal engineering problem. That's when I decided to introduce them to the concept of cascade failure. The thing about infrastructure is that it's designed with built-in redundancies and safety systems. But those same systems can be turned against themselves if you know where to apply pressure. I'd learned this the hard way during my first year on the job, when a simple software update had caused a citywide blackout that lasted for 6 hours. I started triggering deliberate failures throughout the district. Power grids went offline in carefully orchestrated sequences, forcing automated systems to reroute through backup connections that were already overloaded. Water pressure dropped in some areas, while skyrocketing in others. The emergency lighting systems activated, bathing everything in the eerie red glow of crisis protocols. The Kethver leader was clearly trying to communicate with his commanders, but his device was malfunctioning, probably due to the electromagnetic interference from all the electrical chaos I'd unleashed. He was gesturing frantically, his perfect composure finally cracking under the strain of dealing with a situation that wasn't in any of their carefully prepared scenarios. That's when I realized something important. They weren't just unprepared for improvisation. They were psychologically incapable of it. Everything they did was based on predetermined responses to known situations. They'd studied us for 1,000 years, creating detailed models of human behavior and military doctrine. But those models were static. They couldn't account for the infinite creativity that emerges when someone just starts breaking things to see what happens. Was about to test that theory. The emergency services were responding to my citywide chaos, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of trying to shut down the systems I'd compromised, they were adapting to the situation. Police units were using the traffic disruptions as cover to move through the city. Fire departments were coordinating with the water system overloads to create tactical advantages. The military, what was left of it, was using the electromagnetic interference to mask their communications. Humans, it turned out, were really good at improvising. The Kethvar, not so much. I could see more of their soldiers moving through the district now, and they were all struggling with the same problem. They'd been trained to fight humans, not human infrastructure. Every time they tried to establish a position, I hit them with something new. Street lights that suddenly blazed with enough intensity to blind anyone looking directly at them. Automated cleaning systems that sprayed industrial-grade solvents at random intervals. Public address systems that began broadcasting every emergency alert in the city's database simultaneously. But I was running out of systems to break. And the Kethver were learning. Their leader had managed to get his communication device working again, and I could see him coordinating with other units throughout the city. They were starting to develop countermeasures, not just for my specific attacks, but for the general principle of infrastructure-based warfare. Time for the grand finale. Phoenix had been preparing for the annual Technology Expo, a massive event that showcased the latest in urban development and smart city technology. The expo hall was just 2 blocks away, and its systems were integrated with the city's infrastructure for demonstration purposes. It was also loaded with experimental technology that had been brought in for the event. Most importantly, it had a prototype fusion reactor, not a weapons-grade reactor, just a small demonstration unit designed to show how clean fusion power could be integrated into urban environments. But it was connected to the city's power grid, and it had all the safety systems that you'd expect from a prototype that was designed to be shown to the public. Safety systems that I had override codes for. I started the infiltration carefully, using my municipal access codes to penetrate the expo hall's security systems. The Kethver were converging on my position now. They'd figured out that the attacks were being coordinated from somewhere in the area, and they were systematically searching every building and structure. I had maybe 5 minutes before they found me. The fusion reactor was surprisingly easy to access. The demonstration systems were designed to be user-friendly, with intuitive interfaces and comprehensive safety protocols. I started bypassing those protocols one by one, pushing the reactor into configurations that it was never designed to handle. I wasn't trying to create a nuclear explosion. The reactor was far too small and too well shielded for that. But I could create something much more interesting, a controlled electromagnetic pulse that would propagate through the city's power grid and disable every piece of electronic equipment within a 50-mile radius, including the Kethvar's technology. Beautiful thing about their elegant crystalline weapons and scanning devices was that they were clearly based on sophisticated electronics. They'd studied our technology, learned how to counter it, and developed systems that were superior in every way, but they'd never considered what would happen if all the electronics in the area simply stopped working. I triggered the pulse just as the first HFY soldier rounded the corner of my hiding spot. The effect was immediate and total. Every light in the city went out. Every screen went dark. Every electronic system from the simplest calculator to the most sophisticated military hardware shut down simultaneously. The HFY soldier stood frozen in the sudden darkness, his weapon dead in his hands, his scanning device silent. For the first time since the invasion began, he looked genuinely afraid, because for the first time since the invasion began, he didn't know what to do. The silence was deafening. Without the constant hum of electronics, the city felt alien, which was ironic, considering we were the ones being invaded. I could hear the HFY soldiers moving through the area, but their movements were hesitant, uncertain. They were calling out to each other in their musical language, but there was a note of panic in their voices that hadn't been there before. They'd spent 1,000 years studying us, but they'd never learned the most important lesson about humanity. We're at our most dangerous when we're making it up as we go along. I emerged from my hiding spot and found the HFY soldier who'd been approaching me. He was tall and elegant, with features that seemed almost too perfect to be real. His robes, which had seemed so impressive in the daylight, now looked bedraggled and waterlogged. His crystalline weapon was dark and lifeless in his hands. He saw me and raised the weapon, but nothing happened. He tried again, pressing what looked like activation controls, but the device remained dead. I could see the confusion in his eyes. This wasn't in any of their scenarios. You know, I said, pulling out my plasma cutter, you guys really should have studied plumbers. He tilted his head, clearly not understanding. The plasma cutter wasn't sophisticated technology. It was a basic tool that used a simple chemical reaction to generate a cutting flame. No electronics. No complex systems, just controlled combustion in a handheld package. I ignited the cutter, and the HFY soldier stepped backward, his eyes wide with what might have been recognition. He'd studied our weapons, our technology, our military doctrine, but he'd never considered our tools. The thing about humans, I continued, advancing slowly, is that we've been improvising for our entire history. We've been taking things apart and putting them back together in ways they were never designed for. We've been breaking the rules since we figured out what the rules were. The soldier tried to speak, but his voice was weak, uncertain. He'd lost his perfect composure, his absolute confidence in his prepared responses. He was facing a situation that wasn't in any of their models, and he had no idea how to handle it. You studied us for 1,000 years, I said, but you never learned the most important thing about us. We're not predictable. We're not logical. We don't follow the rules, even our own rules. We just figure it out as we go along. Around us, I could hear the sounds of the city coming back to life. Not the electronic systems, but the human systems. People were emerging from buildings, calling out to each other, organizing rescue efforts. The military was regrouping, using non-electronic equipment and old-fashioned tactics. Emergency services were coordinating through voice communication and manual systems. Humanity was adapting. The HFY, apparently, were not. I could see their soldiers throughout the area, standing confused and directionless without their technological advantages. They'd planned for every possible human response, except the one that was actually happening. Complete improvisation based on available resources and creative problem solving. The soldier in front of me lowered his useless weapon and spoke in heavily accented English. We did not expect this. That's your problem, I replied. You can't expect improvisation. It's not predictable. It's not logical. It's just human. In the distance, I could hear the sound of aircraft engines, not the sophisticated fighters that had been grounded by the initial attack, but older planes, civilian aircraft, anything that could fly without complex electronics. The humans were fighting back with whatever they had available, and they were doing it in ways that no amount of study could have predicted. The HFY had made a fundamental error in their understanding of humanity. They'd studied our technology, our military doctrine, our official responses to crisis situations, but they'd never understood that when humans are faced with the impossible, they don't follow the rules, they make new ones. as I watched their perfect invasion dissolve into chaos and confusion. I realized something important. They hadn't just underestimated our capacity for improvisation. They'd fundamentally misunderstood what it means to be human. We don't just adapt to new situations. We actively create new situations, break existing systems, and rebuild everything from scratch, using whatever materials happen to be available. We don't just survive. We thrive on chaos, uncertainty, and the complete absence of predetermined solutions. The Kethver had studied us for 1,000 years, but they'd never learned the most important lesson about humanity. We're not just unpredictable. We're creatively, enthusiastically, relentlessly unpredictable, and that's exactly what makes us dangerous. The soldier in front of me was still standing there, looking lost and confused. Behind him, I could see his colleagues scattered throughout the area, all of them dealing with the same problem. They'd been trained to fight humans, but they'd never been trained to fight human ingenuity. You know what's funny? I said, deactivating the plasma cutter. I'm just a maintenance worker. I fix broken things for a living. This wasn't even my job. He looked at me with something that might have been respect, or possibly fear. What are you going to do now? I looked around at the city, my city, and saw humans emerging from every building, every hiding place, every corner where they'd taken shelter. They were organizing, communicating, adapting. They were turning every available resource into something useful, every obstacle into an opportunity. They were being human. I'm going to fix this, I said. All of it, starting with you. The Kethver soldier looked confused again, but I was already walking away, pulling out my multi-scanner and looking for the next system to break, the next impossible problem to solve with whatever I happened to have in my tool belt, because that's what humans do. We don't just survive the impossible, we make it work for us. And sometimes, that's all it takes to win a war. The Kethver withdrawal began 3 hours later, when their commanders realized that their 1,000-year study of humanity had missed the most important point. We don't just adapt to chaos, we thrive on it. Their perfectly planned invasion fell apart, not because we were stronger or better prepared, but because we were willing to break every rule in the book, including rules we'd written ourselves. The official military reports credited the victory to tactical improvisation and resource optimization. The civilian reports called it making stuff up as we went along. Both were correct. As for me, I went back to fixing broken transit systems. But now I know something I didn't know before. Sometimes the best way to fix something is to break it first, and then rebuild it into something completely different, something human.